There we go. So today's discussion is going to be twofold. We're going to do a real practical side of it. I'm going to talk about stuff that makes me uncomfortable, which is basically just talking about myself and my experience. And one of the reasons, for instance, that this is an important topic to me is because of stuff that we'll be talking about. And then we're going to talk about page 91 and 92 of the Kybalion. At least it's that in my book. It's chapter 9, the principle of vibration. And we're going to read through selected passages in there, but specifically there. The whole beginning part of the chapter is essentially just establishing the supremacy of vibration and giving you a sense or idea of this is what vibration is about. So, you know, that at a low vibratory state, light is essentially invisible. And then it moves into the visible spectrum and it goes through grades until at last it vibrates so high that it becomes invisible again. And the same is illustrated with sound, where it's inaudible, then finally you hear it, and then eventually it's inaudible again. And so as we move to the poles, we get a varying expression of the same thing energetically. So the book spends a great deal of time at the beginning talking about that, and then it cuts to the chase when we get to page 91. Hang on just a sec here. Oh, there we go. But first, it's important to understand that in principle, the principle of vibration, of the seven, it is the third. It's the next third one in line following the principle of correspondence. When we look at the seven esoteric principles, when we look at mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender, when we look at each of these, we're seeing a different expression of this of a simultaneous activity. It's sort of like looking at something happening, but in the beginning with the principle of mentalism and correspondence, these are architectural principles, meaning that the entire thing is built around these two ideas, that the universe is mental and the things have a correspondence or a relationship to each other. That's going to be really important when we talk in our next class about the supernal triangle and relationships. But here, the idea is that architecture is established. Then what happens next then is a discussion of the operation of the universe. And that's where each of these succeeding principles then manifest. And operationally, they manifest in from that point downward in sets of three. So you get vibration, polarization, and rhythm. And then the next step down, you get cause and effect, gender, and then rhythm again. Because as we're following it down the aspect of the tree, let's just share screen really quick here. So as we're looking at the tree, and we can look at it from just this standpoint here, at the top, in the top three spheres, this is where our discussion of the principle of mentalism and correspondence establishes all archetypal relationships that exist beneath them. Then when we get into vibration, polarization, and rhythm, we're looking at chesed, gevura, and tiferet, right? As we're moving around here. When we get to gender, I'm doing this as a review, just to kind of bring us all up to speed. When we get to gender, cause and effect, gender, and rhythm again, it's Netzik, Hod, and Yesod. So these six provide for us the operational aspect of the universe. When we were reading last week in the Kybalion, and it was talking about how you can use one law to as a refuge from other laws, we eventually settled on the idea that the best way to do this, you could do it one of two ways, really. You could seek out and polarize yourself, or you could elevate your vibration, which by default polarizes you. So if you wish to capture the benefit of polarization without having to necessarily, in its truest, freest sense, uh, then one would seek after the principle of vibration. So that's all kind of just bringing us up to review here, okay? So today, what we're looking at then is specifically the principle of vibration as it relates to ourselves and to the rest of the cosmos at large, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to raise our vibe. We're going to look at techniques for meditation on the spot, and I'm going to give you a really good one that you can then use in various ways, and we'll go through it step by step here. Okay, I'll actually walk you through it. And I'll give you, if we have time, I'll touch in brief on how to move your mind, like just kind of with your vibration, what that's about. So, yep, so that's it. So let's dig in first, and let's take a look at page 91 in the Kybalion. This would be at the very bottom, starting in the paragraph that says, but the Hermetic teachings. I'll let you guys catch up here. Welcome, Faith. It's good to see you. But the Hermetic teachings go much farther than do those of modern science. They teach that all manifestation of thought, emotion, reason, will, or desire, or any mental state or condition are accompanied by vibrations. So remember, the all is mind and the universe is mental. So what this is talking about is that changes in mental state result in a change in actual vibratory status. That seems pretty self-evident, right? So if I'm happy or excited, that's a change in mental state. We call that emotion, right? And the idea is that your mental state, your emotion, creates movement, and movement is vibration. So a reduced mental state, a depressive mental state, or mental states which support a depressed or an anxious status, those tend to be of a more low vibratory nature. And we often characterize that in terms of, I feel down and out, right? Which, if you remember the up, down, in, out, that's our language speaking to us the reality of Qabalah and how a low vibratory state pushes one out into the inactive portion of gross matter, right? Because what happens is this. As the universe bifurcates, and on one side is emphasis of spirit, and then on the other side is emphasis of gross matter, spirit then adopts the attitude of the sacred masculine, and matter adopts the attitude of the sacred feminine. So when looking at them as as spirit represents pressure or force, and matter represents resistance or receptivity. The more that one is material, the less receptive they are to spiritual input, which literally sounds like I'm paraphrasing a Bible scripture there. Because the idea then is materiality is not simply I want stuff, but materiality also is my vibratory nature is so slow, so low as to make me sedentary on a spiritual level, unmovable, intransigent, meaning that I can't change because I have become so resistant to change. As one becomes less material, as one becomes less prone to materiality, they then polarize to the spiritual side of things. And as a result, they have a greater degree of force with them. And it's really cool because George Lucas gave us a beautiful narrative to describe all of this in function, in terms of the nature of either side, and how the idea of a force which binds things together, holds things together, passes through and in and out of all things, and is the conscious expression of universe in total. That's pretty cool. That's a very useful tool when you watch things that are Star Warsy, right? But in terms of ourselves, it gives us a sense of where we need to move our minds and our consciousness to progress in a vibratory state, in an elevated vibratory state. All right, let's continue. This is, by the way, super good stuff here. Like, they take all this time to get to this point, and then once they get here, this is a huge bombshell. Like, this is like, so let's continue. It says, and I'm going to back up just a little bit. They teach that all manifestation of thought, emotion, reason, will, or desire, or any mental state or condition are accompanied by vibration, a portion of which are thrown off, and which tend to affect the minds of other persons by induction. This literally is an evidence that your vibration has a physical effect on people around you. And we know this is true simply by our own experience in the workplace or in social events, where you can see a person enter into a room and it's like the light just went on. Like there's just a switch that happened, and all eyes focus on that person because they are a higher vibratory state, which then adopts that aspect of sacred masculine. And so they are attractive, meaning not good looking. It means that they attract the attention of all passive receptive bodies within that space through induction, meaning that what comes from their inside then is absorbed by others. And there's this constant flow back and forth of our receptivity to the vibratory aspects of our environment. Let's continue. This is the principle which produces the phenomenon of telepathy, mental influence, and other forms of action and power of mind over mind. So this brings us to that equation that I've given before, which is active mind and will over passive mind equals your result, whatever that is, whether that is a magical outcome as a result of a magical operation, or this is you gaining sway over another individual through the art of persuasion, so that your vibration is such that you can cause others to vibrate with you. And this is a lot easier when one exhibits an internal locus of control. Think about times in the workplace where you've had a boss who just couldn't seem to keep it together, and every little thing caused that person to become emotionally unstable. That has an impact on everyone around them. And the ones that you tend to wish you had all the time are those bosses, those leaders who are unflappable, who are able to turn, as a result of mental transmutation, every obstacle into an opportunity. This is the ultimate outcome of active mind and will over passive mind. It means that every obstacle becomes an opportunity. It's simply a matter of perspective, and perspective is the result of your vibratory state every single time. So And we know that because our perspective creates a vibratory filter through which we perceive the world around us. It explains why some people can watch an event or a movie and be deeply, deeply moved, and another person completely unmoved, as if they saw a completely different story unfold. That is because of their vibratory state, their degree of connection to things which might cause them to have an elevated emotional response. So let's continue. Every thought, emotion, or mental state has its corresponding rate and mode of vibration. And by an effect of the will of the person or of other persons, these mental states may be reproduced, just like music or the display of light, as it says. Meaning that once you understand the mental formula that is required, and we're not talking a kind of math, we're talking a spiritual association, which I'm going to show you. We're talking about a visualization. The formula is through the principle of correspondence, you can find release. That is, in fact, a higher principle than the principle of vibration. And so you can find a relationship within correspondence that can give you solidity. You can recognize that you correspond, you relate, you are tied to, you are a part of, and then insert blank, the favorable thing which you wish to be a part of. Let's continue. By a knowledge of the principle of vibration, one may polarize his mind at any degree he wishes, thus gaining a perfect control over his mental states, moods, etc. In the same way, he may affect the minds of others, producing the desired mental states in them. Basically, vibrations at will. Hence, active mind and will over passive mind equals your outcome. What is active mind? Active mind is existing, as the Buddha would say, in a state of wakefulness. It is a state of unity. It is a recognition of the other. It is the position of the hanged man, where the object becomes the subject and the subject becomes the object. In this position, it allows you to not absorb, but simply ignore things which otherwise might cause people to become angry because you have the greater vision. You might, an example is like this, and I'm not doing this just to kind of be like, oh, I'm so awesome. But this was an actual dialogue where we were in the car and one of the passengers had noted that the person in front of us seemed to be without residence, and that, you know, there was all this stuff going on with them, and there was a number of perceptions just kind of heaped on. And I said, well, you know, it's possible that this person's just upset. Maybe some bad news had happened. Like, just giving alternatives by being able to assume the position of the hanged man, by not looking at the person objectively, but recognizing the subjective cues that exist within the character of the individual that you're seeing, so that you are able to step into their shoes mentally, and therefore exhibit a sense of compassion. Compassion means that you are experiencing something together with someone else, because you've already probably experienced that before. So it allows for you to have a compassionate attitude. This is way different from mercy. Mercy is an expression where you have greater power than someone else, and as a result, you can rescue them, an act of mercy. You're drowning, I throw you a lifeline. It's a merciful act. You're drowning financially, I literally throw you a financial lifeline. It's an act of mercy where power is given to you so that you are then saved. Compassion is different. Compassion does not require necessarily an act where you bail someone out, but perhaps to provide them alternative support. So slightly different. Let's continue. So what does this have to do with everything? Well, what I'm trying to do is establish for you that there are keys available. And when you understand that these keys have been expressed in these terms where you can grasp them, you can go, okay, so it is true that when I think a certain way, it may cause me to act a certain way or speak a certain way. And it begins on the inside. It literally is an explanation as to why in the New Testament, Jesus goes through a whole exposition where he essentially says, in the past, we were like, if you killed somebody, that was bad, and you'd have to suffer judgment. Today, we're beyond that. He's literally indicating a heightened vibratory state with the impact of a external impact, an externalization of that internal locus of control, that vibratory state. So when he says, today, if you're angry with your brother or your relative or your neighbor, then you might as well have already killed them. Seems harsh until we recognize that if we're seeking that heightened state of vibration, then that does require a sense of self-awareness. It requires a sense of self-identity. It's the whole core meaning of the Temet Nose, the whole idea behind that, meaning that to know oneself, one can have active mind. It is absolutely impossible to have active mind unless you are aware of yourself. That's what it's all about. Otherwise, then the mind is passive. So each of us will find that we have blind spots as a component of our active mind. It's like looking at a quilt with different patterns inside of it, and then a couple of the sections are just plain missing. The plain missing sections could be seen as your passive mind, right? Everything just passes right through, perhaps. But the idea is that the active mind then could cover you, do things, right? And the passive mind is unavailable. You can't do anything with it because the passive mind essentially regulates things that you do. So how do you know where you might find your passive mind? It's your trigger points, to use popular phrasing. It's the things that cause you to become emotionally engaged before you think, or to cause you to be emotionally engaged and impair thinking altogether. It is the point at which you lose your balance. So, and a state of imbalance is what Dion Fortune calls that's how she defines evil. And let's see if I can find that really quick. That was actually a pretty good section. Of course not. No, I'm sorry. You'll have to take my word for it. It's in the sacred or the Kabbalistic Tarot by Robert Wang. He's actually citing a section by Dion Fortune, so it's a book within a book citing. But essentially, his point is that there's either positive or negative evil. Negative evil is often environmental; it's just passive. Positive evil is where you're actively seeking to set things out of balance, right? So the idea of good is, in this context, good and evil are equivocated to. Evil is that which sets things out of balance, and good is that which sets things into balance. And one could simply look at the organism of the human being for verification of this idea. When we are healthy and we are well, we consider that good. When we are sick or ill, that means that the malady causes an imbalance within the core systems of the body, resulting in mortality, right? That's the idea. So when you're sick, you have disease. That's the word I was looking for, which essentially is when you are healthy, you are at ease, and when you are ill, you have dis-ease, meaning that it is the opposite. And disease then results in death, which is evil. You could take it one additional step. and say to live is good and evil is the reverse of live, right? So that's bad. Okay, so now that we've laid all this groundwork and we know that we have power and that we have the capability of doing things, how can we adapt? And why do it at all? Well, this was one of the biggest draws for me. When I first began working with the occult, my desire was to figure a way to get a grip on my brain. I suffered from super levels of anxiety and depression, and it seemed to be ruining everything. And I knew that some alternative needed to be available. For me, it always wound up being sort of give me the nuts and bolts and let me work it through. So 7 esoteric principles show me that I can have resort within the law, against the law, and this is the place to go. The journey that I took to resolve my physical and mental problems is not dissimilar, actually, to the little mini story that you see at the front end of Doctor Strange, where Doctor Strange is running around trying to find someone who could figure out how to fix his hands, and he finds out about a guy who had complete recovery. And then he discovers that this person had recovery because not of medicine, but because of metaphysical reasons. The principle that the universe is mental and that vibration can result in mental transmutation, which can have a physical impact on the universe at large, was very meaningful to me. It meant that there's a potentiality to turn things around. But in order to do that, you kind of have to figure out where the material end ends and the spiritual end begins. For me, it was understanding that there are, as a component of actual physical anxiety, electromagnetic influences. So, like, bad places for me to go was the dairy section or the frozen food aisle, because those have lots of motors and things like that. And I couldn't understand why I would just go into complete anxiety when I'd go into there until an electrician explained to me that, oh yeah, this can cause all kinds of problems. And if you have your desk by a big electrical section in your house, it can actually affect your work. So I took that to heart, and then I started experimenting with that. So that was kind of on the material end. Then there was the idea of what are the tools, the really basic tools that then can become foundation or substrate that I can use later, right? That I can always go back to. And the core of it that I discovered or rediscovered, since this was discovered obviously a long time ago, is breathing. That breath is the core. There are loads of mental correspondences that you can tie in later with the idea of atmosphere or air and the universe being mental and the element of air being tied to mind. And so the input and output of oxygen being related to the input and output of mind and relating to vibratory states. Those are some of just the little connections. But the really good ones are tied to the act itself. So let's take a moment. Let's take a moment now and talk about breathing. But before we do, are there any questions? No? Thumbs up? Awesome. Okay. So breathing is in 4 stages all the time, and you can tie these stages to the seasons of the year, and you can tie these stages to different worlds within the tree. It really depends on how you wish to focus. My favorite association is to recognize how breath and the seasons parallel each other. And so as I breathe, if I think of the season as I'm in that point of breath, it allows me to adopt all of the correspondences associated with that season. Okay. Usually when I do this, I simply allow myself to become aware that I am breathing. I don't just like dive right in and go, okay, I'm going to hold my breath, but I allow myself a moment to be aware of my breathing. As I'm following my breath in and out, and by the way, I'm going to do this in a way so that perhaps later you guys can use this. I hope that this one will be effective later. So I'll use the second person. So as you are following your breath in and out, you can become aware of the principle of rhythm, the cycle, the flow, the intake, and the exhalation. When you are aware of intake and exhalation, on the exhalation that you are prepared to begin your breathing meditation, just kind of be, okay, it's coming in, it's going out, it's coming in, it's going out. On the exhale that it goes out, allow yourself to begin. This is winter. This is emptiness. This is the empty plain with snow. It is complete stillness. There is no energy whatsoever in that point. You have no air. You are existing completely independent as much as possible of any external input. Breathing is the #1 interface with all the rest of reality. It was the most significant act associated with the creation of man. The breath received within the nostrils. And by the way, it's good in breathing pattern to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and in through your nose and out through your mouth. This will help reinforce that spiritual association of becoming alive or being enlivened as a result of breath. So as you're in the winter state, hold it as long as you can comfortably. Just simply allow the lack of air and recognize the alteration of your physical state. Recognize that over time your heartbeat might increase a little bit. You might feel a sense of, if you really are pushing it, a burning, a longing, a deep desire for air. You can sit with that for a moment, and as you do this meditation, you'll find that your endurance in winter will progress over time, longer and longer and longer, allowing you to savor the sense of emptiness. When you feel the need to breathe, don't just suck in the air right away. Allow yourself to gently intake the air through your nose. This is spring. This is the building up of energy. This is the flowing inward and upward. As you inhale, you'll feel your body change. You'll feel your heart rate decrease. You'll feel your pulse decrease. You'll feel your sense of need being sated, and allow yourself to fill up completely, as full as is comfortable, and then stop and hold that. When you hold it, that's summer, that's fullness, that is complete irradiance. It is no longer, it is the other pole of the emptiness of winter. Again, you are completely independent because you're not drawing into from the environment. The environment has been drawn into you, and you are sustained by what you carry within you and also the air that is with you. You're going to find that as you hold the air within you, eventually your desire to exhale will become just as great as your desire to inhale. This is the principle of rhythm enforcing its supremacy. And it's something to contemplate, that no matter how much you will it, the principle of rhythm must have sway. It must be permitted to allow you to exhale. What you took in from the universe must be returned. And as you exhale, don't just, heavy breath out. Allow it to just gradually flow out from you. These are the leaves falling in autumn. You'll feel that the transition is dramatically different from the transition that you feel when you're taking in the air. There's a sense of release. When you're drawing in the air in springtime, it is a release from emptiness with the promise of fullness. But now you've experienced the fullness to the extent of your capacity, and it requires release. The thing within you must be returned. And so the metaphor of your existence is capsulated within the process of your breathing. You completely exhale, you're completely empty, and we recommence with wintering. And that cycle just works its way through. And each and every association that you might be able to draw between your breath and life and the seasons are absolutely appropriate. The turning of the leaves in autumn literally is sort of like, I don't know, the turning of the color of your cheeks if you happen to be watching yourself in the mirror, because you're allowing all that out. I suppose you could really go into all the colors, the blue of winter from not holding your breath too long, but ultimately the idea of this meditation is that it allows you, when you do this frequently enough, it builds for you mental constructs that then you can step into later at a moment's notice. So that when you recognize that suddenly that thing within you has happened and you're feeling anxious, you're worried or concerned, there's an element of fear involved, and you wonder, okay, where is all this coming from, right? You run through the list, and you recognize, okay, and here's another technique. You look at external influences, you ask yourself, have I done all the things that are required of me? Paid the bills, whatnot, made sure my commitments, my duties at work are fulfilled, things that would cause ordinary anxiety. If this is true, then it might be environmental, meaning that am I in a location with a lot of EM? Is there a lot of stress in the environment that I am inducting? Meaning that if I'm in a toxic environment with lots of yelling and anger and screaming and depressed people, and there's a lot of verbal aggression or violence or what have you, then your vibratory state can be impaired by simple induction. Just being a part of that can make you feel negatively because you're absorbing it. If you recognize that, boom, awareness steps to the forefront, and now you have an opportunity to do something about it. The last thing is, of course, am I feeling this way because of something spiritual? These things have to be addressed on a more personal level, with introspection. But when looking at it and sensing it, the next step after it kind of working through the identification process is to take command of yourself. And this can be done simply by an exhalation and sitting momentarily with the emptiness as you allow that to commence your cycle. And it only takes a few moments. And wonderfully enough, we're all allowed to breathe out there. So no one will begrudge you for just taking a moment and going, give me a moment. That's the one thing that we often don't afford ourselves, is the opportunity to take a beat. And instead of simply keep responding and acting or reacting, taking that beat to establish our vibration. So any questions so far? Nope. Excellent. All right, let's talk about, so that's a meditation technique that you can do over a period of 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 20 minutes. And by doing it, it allows you also, it gives you something to consider, something to think about in your meditation. The number one reason why meditation fails for almost everyone is because we believe we are expected to think of nothing, that we're supposed to clear our minds, that somehow or another we're supposed to create a white space. This is not what the human brain is for. The human brain is a thinking machine. You give it nothing to think about, it turns into an Ouroboros and eats itself. It just will. It just will consume its own tail until. So you must give yourself something to think about. In one of the Buddhist teachers that I had, when we discussed this breathing technique, he said, this is a great way to get your monkey mind under control. Meaning that there's an aspect in your head that's like, wah, and it's just needing something to do. And if you supply it something like manage my autonomic system by breathing in a regulated pace, and then allowing an aspect of your consciousness to just nurture that, it allows you then to engage in a higher state of consciousness, a higher vibratory state, and have communion with your higher self. That's how that's done. But you must allow that monkey mind, that active self that just wants to think about everything, to have something specific to consider. And when you do this, it then allows you to open up a vast canopy of imagery within your mind. And that brings me to the next thing. So when we're talking about the principle of vibration, we recognize that all things vibrate. When you come in contact with something that you consider solid matter, like a wall, a pole, a tree, a desk, realize that this object is in fact in motion, but at a state of motion that is so slow as to be imperceptible, but it's still moving. The key to that is that it allows you to use any surface as a meditative mirror of a sort. What do I mean by that? Okay, typically a mirror is something that, has a reflective backing and allows light to be bounced off of. The idea of a mirror, though, is that it's like a window, that you're seeing something more, something else, something farther away. The mirror itself allows you to reflect on that something. And reflection is another form of thinking. So, if you don't have a mirror at hand, let's say you're in the shower and you're just trying to relax. You do the breathing exercise to get yourself centered. You want to find your center. Need a drink? So you do the breathing exercise so that you can find your center. When you've found your center, and by center, I mean that wobbliness. Remember last week when Parks had that really cool radio? And we showed that if you get the electromagnetic frequency just right, then the little dot goes right to center. And we learned from the Kybalion that the center is the most natural place, that things function best when they are at their center. And we understood that the center then represents the highest aspect, the highest world within the tree. It is the aspect of absolute, which is exhibited as fire, right? So, and plasma. So the center then is, and all things function at their best at that center. We're going to talk about that more in the next class. But when you dial in your vibration, you will feel yourself come to your center. You'll know the difference. You'll feel a sense of calm, a sense of stillness. You may not be at peace, because the environment could be very disruptive. But in spite of that, you are calm in the face of the storm. That's what you want. You don't need to feel all peaceful all the time. What you need to feel is centered. You need to be the internal locus of control that then, through the power of inductive mental vibration, influences your environment in a way that would help sustain your heightened vibration, right? So when you're saying, let's say, in the shower, and you put your hand on the wall, recognize the sensation you've got. I chose the shower because the water on your back will help you remember the fluidity of all things around you, which are material. That is the liquid hay of the Yod He Vav He, right? Within you, in your breathing exercise, is the Vav. It is the air. And the wall in front of you then becomes the hay of gross matter, but it is still the hay. And it is every bit as sacred as the Yod. It is the Malkut, the hay of Malkut, is every bit as sacred as Keter, okay? Because it is an outpouring of Keter. It is the result of the diversification of Keter. So when you touch the wall, knowing that line of connection, right? Recognizing that this is simply an expression of that, you can press your mind through the wall. And what do I mean by that? You allow the wall to become the surface of your visualization. It's like the screen for your inner movie. Touching it gives, at least me, it gives you a sense of connection. It's not just me looking at it, it's me feeling it vibratorily, because vibration is experienced through three central organs. We hear vibration, we see vibration, and we feel vibration. So, and these are different modes of operation of the same energetic output. What this means for you is that, let's say you're in this meditation and you're just exploring, you're wanting to see where your mind will take you. It's a good way to start. You have three tools that can then function. You feel the vibratory imaginations, right? We're talking about creative imagination. And imagery is, again, we classify it typically as to see it, right? It's an image. However, there are different ways to experience an image. And we can, for instance, experience a sculpture tactily. We can experience an image descriptively, auditorially. Each of us, what I'm trying to do is say that each of us may experience the expression of our psychic output differently. So if, for instance, you're the kind of person where as you're touching the wall, you hear things, but you don't see anything or feel anything, that's perfectly natural. If you see it, but you don't feel it or hear it, that's also. Sometimes it might be a process of kinesthesia, but regardless, it is a process of you synchronizing your vibration to the image that you're pursuing in your vision. So that's kind of just a broad stroke of just one of the ways that you, through the principle of vibration, can do more than just impact your mood, more than just impact the mood or productivity of the people around you or your environment, but also that you can use vibration as a means of gaining intelligence, gaining information from the universe by synchronizing your vibration with the universal consciousness. And these are simple techniques to do that. So it's different, by the way, this technique is different from astral projection. This is not astral projection. This is much closer to remote viewing, where you remain in place, but your consciousness is able to see it as if you were there, or experience it, feel it, or hear it, or often it can be all three, as if you were there, watching it happen, or experiencing it. Or you may experience it as a outpouring of complete intelligence where you have absolute understanding, meaning that it's not like someone's explaining you a concept. You now have understanding of the concept from front to back. It's, you simply know. It's like, boom, oh wow, and now I get it. um when that experience happens, um there is often a verbalization of grasping, and so you might say, I get it, or I got it. In Tron Legacy, the new Tron movie, there's this excellent short scene where Clue grabs the little ring off of our protagonist, and he looks at it, and it shows him the guy's life up to that point, and then he says, got it. Like he grasped all of what that guy was in a moment and had complete understanding. So that's also what is available through the principle of vibration. Oh
Yeah.
dear. Well, no, it's funny, but talking about the principle of vibration often can accompany sort of a low vibratory state because people become contemplative.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to recognize that contemplation means receptivity. So the flow in terms of meditation is, it's not always this super high vibe or a super low vibe. It's choosing your vibe
Right.
for the appropriate time. So if I wish to contemplate something, I'm not going to amp up my vibe necessarily. Instead, I may choose to still myself, to reduce my vibe so that I can be receptive. Um, when you think of a wavelength, when you think of how a wavelength operates, when you have a higher vibration, your wavelength compresses. And that means that there's less room for things to interrupt your vibratory pattern, right? Because it's compressing. So it's a lot harder to put something in there. When it expands out, lots of things can get into your vibratory pattern. So as your vibe lowers, you're more subject to your environment. As your vibe heightens, you're less subject to your environment. The energy is the same energy, and the duration of the energy is essentially the same. It's just that because you constrict the wavelength, you constrict the apparent duration. So sadness seems to endure longer than happiness, but it's only because the wavelength of sadness extends the duration in subjective experience. So compressing it down, there's less that can get in there. On the other end, think of it this way: if your vibe is really high, you might find yourself talking a lot. If you're talking a lot, that means you're not hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's projecting, right? You're projecting with speech. So masculine, projective, creative effort, receptivity, different form of creation, right? One is planting the seed, that's an act of creation. The other is receiving the seed and allowing it to grow, different mode of the same function. So passivity, not a bad thing. I don't want to make you think like, oh, I retreat, but you want to do that in a meditative position where you're seeking to, and you want to make sure that when you become passive like that, that your environment is in a stable state. Like you turn off the cell phone, you make sure that the door is closed and you have a quiet time. because as you're extending that out and allowing things to distill, the only way for things to come down to you is for you to open up that vibratory length and become still, so that things can distill upon you, right? And then squeeze it together when you're going out in the environment, keep a high pace, things like that. Makes you more resilient, you know. The thing to do is to be the surfer on the wave, and don't lament the loss of the wave breaking on the shore, just seek a new wave. So that's what you do. There's always another wave. So,
Cowabunga.
cowabunga. Talk to you guys later. Bye.
Okay, talk to you in a bit.
All right.